That's not enough sleep. You need one good solid 8-hour night.
That could happen Friday into Saturday.
Yeah.
I could schedule
Mine is
that.
usually Thursday into Friday. I feel so much better.
I feel fine. I'm just irritable and
Oh, that's fine.
sleepy.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, sleep doesn't fix
I
irritability.
may topple over on this. I just wobble out of the frame. Okay.
This is Eric and Tammy wobbling away.
Eric's gone mad.
Eric's gone mad. This is my idea.
It is?
Well, the title
It was, I know.
Don't you remember?
I do.
I came up with a title and had no idea what to do with it after.
Yeah,
And you fixed it.
Funny how that happens.
Hey, you got to have at least one of those per year. That's what I say. All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett. I am joined by
Tammy Melchien.
How you doing today, Tammy?
Pretty good.
Good.
Stayed dry even though it's pouring outside.
Yeah, it's raining outside, so if there's a clap of thunder that you hear that the mic picks up, it's just Alec clapping his hands. We are addressing, this is a 3-week series, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. Today it is called The World's Gone Mad.
World's gone mad. After all the long series we've done, don't 3 weeks just seem like,
It's like-
is it even worth it?
Right. I mean, in some ways to talk about it is to give too much attention to something that will be here and gone in 3 weeks.
But this one's going to be memorable.
It's going to be great. So, Tammy, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the heck we mean by the world's gone mad and what are we talking about with this big idea?
Well, we are talking about how everyone seems to be so angry.
Yes.
But that was part of the idea came from that of just it seems like there's such kind of a culture of offense and anger and all of this stuff going on. And so we thought we would do a series on that. And we're kind of breaking this up of like angry at myself, angry at us is the church, angry at the world. It's maybe you could think of it as the shadow side of the 3 C's in some ways a little bit.
Okay. I see that.
And so, but as this came together, a couple overarching things is one, I started realizing all the scriptures we were picking were from letters of Paul. And so that became a scriptural focus as we're going to look at some of the wisdom that Paul wrote to the churches to draw from this series. And then also, and you'll see this as we go through it, it felt like the solution in all 3 weeks was grace. And maybe with just a little different twist on it each time. And so as we go through it, I'll point that out to you. But I think it's going to be a great series. It's going to give us an opportunity to talk about some things that we maybe haven't talked about in a long time.
Definitely feels like it's one where we can take exactly what's coming from Scripture and apply it to what's happening right now in our lives. So that part I'm really looking forward to. All right, well, let's get started with week 1. And we are talking about the world's gone mad. And first, we're mad at me.
Mad at me. And there were some different directions we could have gone with this. What we ended up deciding to do was looking at the idea of failure and how we get mad at ourselves. And sometimes we get mad at ourselves for things we did, or sometimes we get mad at ourselves for things that we didn't do.
Gotcha.
Ways that we didn't kind of fulfill what we had hoped we would do. And so I don't know. I feel like it's been a really long time since we talked about this because, this first one, mad at me, it's couched in the bigger issue of maybe my identity, how I see myself. But I feel like giving us a chance to really hone in on this idea of maybe the sense of failure. So you see they're like done when we did do something wrong or not done when we didn't do something right. And I think we can, probably all of us feel to one degree or another this sense of failure in some area of our lives, whether it be relationally or career-wise or whatever it might be. And so we're going to look at that, and then we're going to look at some realities from Paul's writings. So you see on the page there's 3 realities that we've talked about looking at that help us understand our identity and help us understand what Christ did for us to kind of free us from that.
And so do you feel like, I don't know that this was necessarily said here, but do you feel like as we like even the way that we're couching this, like if we think about how the world's gone mad, one of the first things we can do is just kind of look at ourselves. I mean, that it has like that kind of, if we're going to move out there, we probably need to start. Yeah, because
we feel that, I think even the big idea statement talks about the internal conflict. Yeah, God heals our internal conflict. Like so many of us feel that kind of angsty in us. And honestly, sometimes if we don't address what's going on in us, we can end up projecting it out on other things. And so let's look at our own kind of sense of that internal conflict. And this is the first time you see the solution here is to embrace grace. And so that this is for the stuff going on inside of me as I begin to identify it and understand, is to let the grace of God kind of wash over that and free me from that internal conflict.
That's good.
Good?
Yeah, I like that. And so like you said, from a shadow side standpoint, this is kind of that celebrate piece.
Yeah, I think, it's these lies that I tell myself about, how I've screwed up or how I've not measured up, and instead recognizing who I am in Christ. And so it's about my relationship with God. Yeah. And so I can see where you can look at it as the shadow side. And I don't know how overt, or I don't know how we'll talk about
we don't
that.
know if we'll say it out loud that way, but that's definitely
was in the mind and the framing of this.
Good. All right. So then week 2, we're mad at us.
Yeah, and when we use the word us, we're talking about the church community. Okay. And I honestly don't know. I can't remember, at least when we've really addressed like this topic of kind of conflict within the church. We've talked about conflict before, but usually more in nature of your relationships or your life as a whole. But here, we're going to go there a little bit with, that God's dream for us as a community, as a church community, unity is very important to him. And I mean, even, Jesus, the night before he was betrayed, and you have in John 17, you have this long prayer that he prays. The thing he prayed for us was that we would be one. And yet, how often, do we see kind of stuff come up in church communities that ends up fracturing that unity? And a lot of times we feel totally justified sometimes in it too, of, oh, this person did this, or I didn't like this, or this decision was made that I didn't agree with, or, whatever it might be. And to recognize that, like, I really feel like that, we get mad at each other and we end up breaking God's heart in the way that we kind of break the unity that he desires to see in us. And so, we're going to look at some of what Paul says here, because again, remember, Paul is writing in his letters, he's writing to church communities. Right. He's writing to specific church communities, and he says things like here in Colossians, like, rid yourself of anger, rage, malice, slander. He's talking to the church. He's saying, verse 12, that therefore as God's chosen people, holy, to clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And so we're going to look at when we have conflicts or disagreements, or when our feelings get hurt, or whatever it might be, in the nature of in the context of our church community, are we kind of going down the path of anger and malice and all of that stuff, or are we going down the path of kindness? And so the grace angle in this is we're called to be people that extend grace to each other. And so this is really going to be focused on our relationships in the church, and and maybe even part of the takeaway might be that if there's something that is in between you and somebody else sitting here, don't leave today until you kind of have a chance to talk about it.
No, that's good. That's convicting. That's powerful. And I like the progression too of like kind of embracing the grace, and then we have that affords us the opportunity to extend it out to each other. It's a nice little kind of storyline that's being told.
Which gets us to the third week, and where we're talking about the world, so mad at them. Right. So, I mean, the focus here is on people that are not part of the church community. And the grace angle on this is we are to embody grace then out in the world. And so, there are, again, if you look at Paul's letters, there are specific ways that he talks about a lot of his instruction are to those in the church, but then he also gives instructions to how we are to behave towards people outside. In Colossians 4 there, be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so you know how to answer everyone. And, kind of looking at that is as Christ followers, we can get sucked right into the middle of this cultural fray of division, and we can just start shouting our arguments along with everybody else. And I don't really feel like that's who God is calling us to be in this. And so, we want to challenge one another to take a step back and really think about how we are embodying grace in this age of outrage.
Yeah. Well, because a lot of times we feel compelled to defend the faith, or to stand up for what you believe in, and there's part of that can feel really noble, like can feel like, oh, this is like what we're supposed to do, stand up for Jesus, right? So I mean, there's like a really and there are probably some places in justice areas where we don't do that enough.
Yes.
And so trying to define the difference between what that looks like and what this is, and how to, I mean, you've got the Andy Stanley quote, which I love, never make a point at the expense of making a difference.
Yes.
So, I mean.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about that dichotomy there, because too, I feel like, when it comes to justice, we're fighting for other people on, kind of on behalf of God for what is right. So many times the arguments we get in where we feel like we have to defend God, or like we have to fight for Jesus, and I think Jesus is probably doing okay. So, you know what I mean? I think and sometimes I think when we do that, we end up putting a wedge between other people and Jesus, which is the exact opposite of what he would want us to do. Right. And so, I mean, there are times when we need to speak out for ways that people are not being treated in the way of Jesus. But I think this is more like what we're going to focus on here is more these times where we, if we're honest, it's really more about like us wanting our point. Right. And we're probably making it harder for people to find their way back to God when we do that. Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I feel like this also speaks to that progression of what's possible and credible, that it's like, if it's not changed in here, if it's not changed with each other, how in the world do we expect for to change the world to change happen outside of that? Yeah. And so, I mean, maybe, in many ways it might be really interesting to try to figure out what it looks like to bring the whole series into each week, because there's probably it's probably more dependent on each other than maybe we even initially thought. True. Especially when we're talking about grace and the way that it plays out. Well, this is fun. I mean, I kind of wish that we had 7 or 8 more weeks to handle this, to tackle it. But we're gonna try to. We're gonna smash it into 3. We're gonna make it happen in 3. So there you go. I mean, we've concluded this conversation in a relatively short amount of time. But that's exciting, and I'm looking forward to what God's going to do with the brainstorm. Anything else? Anything we're leaving out? I think it'll be good. All right. Thanks, everybody. This has been the Big Idea Podcast, praying for awesome brainstorms and great ideas to communicate God's truth. Thanks. This is Eric and Tammy saying so long.